I'm so excited. This is our She's a Boss series with Commonwealth, and we're really engaging with some uncommon minds this month for Women's History Month. And today I have Dorcia Jolliff, the Chief Information Officer of Space Force. I call it Space Force. That's the name I'm sticking with. You can correct it later.
We'll correct it later.
At Lockheed Martin. So I'm really excited to welcome Dorcia today. So Dorcia, tell us a little bit about your background.
So Christina, you know where I'm going to start. I was born and raised in Jamaica. And that's really, really important, not only because I'm so proud of my immigrant heritage, but it'll explain the accent. And when I mispronounce words, I'll just say because I'm Jamaican. So
we'll explain it that way.
That's right. That's right. So born and raised in Jamaica. And then in ninth grade, I moved to Mount Vernon and had a pretty good, yes, that's where Christina and I met, and had a pretty good high school experience. And then I went to Boston and majored in chemical engineering at Northeastern University and did a 5-year program there. And the only thing I learned was that there was no way I was going to be a chemical engineer when I graduated. So I went into IT consulting, did that for a few years. Then we moved to Florida, chasing after, well, somebody who was not my husband then, who became my husband later. And that's when I got a job at Lockheed Martin. And I have been at Lockheed Martin for 18 years now.
Wow.
Yeah, so I joined as an engineer for Lockheed Martin. And now I'm the CIO of Lockheed Martin Space. Space Force is one of our many customers. I say this because Christina refuses to acknowledge that I'm not the CIO of Space Force.
Just embrace it. We're always, every time I think of it, I'm just going to think about the series on HBO. And
yeah. Not even close. So for the record, I am the Chief Information Officer for Lockheed Martin Space. I have a team of 800 or so fantastic IT professionals. Lockheed Martin Space is $12 billion in sales, and we have many customers, including the US Navy, NASA, who is commercial, Space Force, and we build satellites and spacecraft. So that's where I am now.
I'd just like to reiterate that she did say Space Force was one of the
As a customer. Yes, thanks, Christina.
Did you always want to be an engineer? So obviously that is definitely a West Indian parent choice. You can be an engineer. One of your
well, to be honest, I didn't even really know what an engineer was.
Oh,
the West Indian choice is to be a doctor.
Your parents had different choices.
I'm telling you, throughout my whole, as I was growing up, I was going to be a doctor. And then I was in the Inroads program. And I had an internship. And I met an engineer, a chemical engineer, and he said, you should be an engineer. And I said, why? And he said, because if you're an engineer, there isn't anything you couldn't be afterwards. And so I went and did chemical engineering, and that is hands down the hardest engineering major there was.
Wow.
And after being a major, there's nothing you can't do after you survive chemical engineering.
So I guess you would say that his advice was absolutely true, that it just made you flexible in being able to transition anywhere.
And that's exactly it. And when you think about a program like Inroads, and I tell my kids this all the time, it makes your world bigger. Because I was on a path to go be a doctor or a lawyer, traditional careers that you think about. My world was so small that I didn't have the concept of this whole engineering thing. Something like Inroads, where you go, you get mentorship, you get training, your world gets bigger and bigger, then you see opportunities to do different things. So I think that's just so important for our young people to make their worlds bigger so that they have more choices.
I remember your heavy involvement in NSBE as well. And so, when you think about whether it's Inroads, whether it's NSBE, do you credit that greatly with helping you along, with exposing you to different careers, different people, et cetera?
That is exactly the point of making the world bigger. It's getting involved. So, and let's start with NSBE. Something like NSBE taught me how to be a leader. And there's a difference between being bossy and being a leader.
Yes.
And the NSBE experience was even bigger because you were being a leader of people who were volunteers. There's a very big difference between paying somebody and having control over them because you're paying them, and having this volunteer organization where you have to get things done through influence. That's what NSBE taught me. And I took that same kind of NSBE thinking where you get involved and you pull people along with you when I started my time at Lockheed, because there were programs. And you could show up for work, do your work, and go home. Or like college, right? You could just show up, do your classes, and go home. Or you could get involved. And that's one of the things I started doing, getting involved. And when you get involved, you meet people. And when you meet people, you build relationships. And when you build relationships, you can get sponsorship because these people know you on a different level. All of a sudden, you have these people who associate you with something they're interested in, right? And then they're sitting in a meeting, they can speak up and say, no, I know Dorcia, she's awesome. And you're making your world bigger and bigger as you make these connections. So yeah, learned that all the way back in NSBE and took it all the way through my career here at Lockheed.
Right. So tell us a little bit about your trajectory at Lockheed, because it's not like one day you woke up and you're like, oh, and today I'm CIO. There are a number of experiences that really prepared you for this role. Tell us a little bit about that.
So remember we were talking about that chemical engineering thing. Why would you be a chemical engineer and then change afterwards? It turns out that mentor from En-ROADS was absolutely right. When I walked out of Chemi, and it started back then, I went into IT consulting, right? And there's a big difference between chemical engineering and IT consulting. But again, you have this brain thought. Your brain makes connections and you use those connections, right? So take that to Lockheed Martin. I started out in engineering. By the way, engineering is very different from IT consulting. But again, you have the right thought, you have the right approach, like we talked about, got involved and connected, worked hard in engineering, and I was always a firefighter. I got chosen to be a firefighter because of that flexibility. And the second thing I got chosen from, and I think it goes back again to the flexibility from chemical engineering, is the translation. Because I switched careers often, I always had to get it straight in my mind about what these things mean. So, for example, one of my roles in engineering, they made me the lead for one of the cyber programs. Can't talk too much about it, but I was the lead. Now, these cyber guys are ridiculously smart. I was hands down the least smart person in the room. But
Okay, I can do that, but okay.
No. Believe it. These are the cyber guys. But here's the problem that they had. They couldn't translate what they were doing to something that normal people could understand. And so it was so clothed in all this secrecy and mystery and tech stuff that they couldn't get any money because nobody knew what they were doing. So my contribution was the least smart person in the room, but at least I could understand what they did, what they were doing, translate it to something in English that other people could understand, and tell the story of what they were doing. And first they called me the Eye of Mordor because, clearly I didn't belong with them and their tech people. But then they realized the value of the translation, right? And after cyber, I did some stuff with the Navy, and so I moved around quite a bit, and every time it was a new experience, and you just had to bring that connection, that flexibility, that get in where you fit in and add value. And so I did that for 17 years in my engineering career. And then one day, one of my sponsors said, hey, there's a new job opening up in IT. So think about it. When you're in engineering, you have this career path going, you have your plans, you're gonna step through the different levels. And I was doing a good job of getting diversity of experience. And then somebody says, hey, you should go do IT. I'm like, well, I'm an engineer, I don't do IT. But then if you think about how things are progressing, IT is becoming very software defined. I was a software engineer. Somebody made that connection about taking an engineer and joining them with the IT organization. And I will tell you, over the past year, I have had so much fun in just a new way of thinking, a new way of operating, right? And it's, again, the same theme throughout. taking all of my engineering background and bringing it to this new IT domain. And I recognize the IT folks because they're good engineers too, right? They're doing fantastic work. And so I recognize my engineering people and these IT people, and now I am a much better technical person, more well-rounded, more diversity in background and experience.
So that's interesting, and I want to touch on that because I've become a bit fascinated, especially this year and last year, with this whole concept of the Renaissance person, right? I think that, as we've moved into the 2000s, but really the 2020s, you see people with their hands in so many different things and excelling at those different things. And as you transitioned, whether it was away from chemical engineering into the consulting space, into the engineering space, into the IT space, and have managed to excel at each level along the way, how did you smooth those transitions, right, to make sure that it was a continuous learning and acceleration, and also how do you think that that is preparing you for whatever you might do next?
So smoothing the transition, and this got better as I got more mature in my career. It's the acknowledgement that you don't know everything. There's no way you can. Being comfortable with that. I'm not an IT person, but I'm the CIO, right? And it's being comfortable in your skin that you don't know, but boy, am I curious. And boy, am I, willing to learn. And boy, am I willing to put in the time. And boy, do I appreciate the people who are experts.
Yeah.
So I don't try to, stand over them. I don't try to take away anything from their knowledge. My value that I bring is the experience I bring from all of my time. And I bring my experience and you bring your experience, and we make the organization better. There's a little bit of difference than being the boss, right? Where you know everything. That's old school. That's an old school mentality where you're the boss and impossible. Like you said, there's just too much going on. You can't possibly. Now the thing is, how do you become that connector? How do you form the team with all the folks that you need and become that connector and figure out what value you add as part of this larger team? And then you form this high performing team going together where everybody feels like they have a seat at the table. They have value that they bring, right? And you are all working forward to meet some goal. And of course, at Lockheed Martin Space, mission mission has never been a problem for us, right? We have some fantastic missions. So that's something that can galvanize our team, and we feel. So I was talking to the Mars lander from a few weeks ago, and I was talking to one of my applications director, and he was talking about his grandmother. And we're IT, right? So we support the programs that do that incredible work. And he was saying, my grandmother doesn't know that I didn't personally put that thing on Mars. But again, we all feel like we're part of the mission and we're supporting. So that's what you got to do with your teams.
I'm just like his grandmother, and I'll just be telling everybody that Dorcia launched every rocket that happened, every space landing. When we make it to Mars and have the first colony, you will have personally set it up and walk the astronaut to the rocket and off.
Well, and you got to feel that kind of tied to the mission too for what you're doing. And if you don't have the kind of passion, if you don't have that kind of passion about what you're doing, whatever you're doing, not everybody can work in space, right? But back before this job, when I built flight simulators, I talked passionately about building the simulator for a Chinook helicopter or for an F-16 jet, or it's still finding that mission and having that be the drive behind the team.
So one of the interesting things about the pandemic has been the way that it has changed the way that we work, the way that we engage, the way that we think about teams, productivity, et cetera. How has the pandemic, if it has, changed your work?
Well, I'll tell you, on a personal and professional level. So I started this new IT job in end of February, and the pandemic hit in earnest in March. So I was 1 month into the job. And by the way, I had to move my family from Florida to Colorado. So huge personal move. And the pandemic has been horrible in so many ways. I will tell you that it has been fantastic for IT. We have done things in weeks and months that in the past took years upon years to do. The whole business, the whole Lockheed Martin business now has a passion for digital, a passion for IT. Funding showed up from all over the place because guess what? Today, people were in the office working, tomorrow they couldn't, and the show had to go on. So it was all of a sudden IT. How do you facilitate that? I have gotten stuff done that it's just been amazing because people recognize the need. Yes. They recognize the need to move fast. And by the way, our customers are asking for it too.
Right.
So for me, it has been the sweet spot of demand from the customer, demand from our businesses, and just demand for the business to keep running. So it has been an awesome year for advancing stuff, as horrible as things have been, in the pandemic world.
So it's interesting that you say that because IT space has gotten so big. The space has become so important. How do you balance everything between being a CIO, being a mother, being a wife, being a daughter, and being a sister, and being all the roles that you have to be in your life? How are you balancing that together?
I don't know if I can claim balance. I know I can claim the juggling. And one of the things I talk about all the time is seasons, right? So we all go through seasons in our life. And I had a season where things were a lot more calm. And my partner, my husband, I was calm, he was busy. In this season, I am super, super busy. And he now has to spend time making sure the kids get homeschooled. He has to spend time. So we switched off. And he recognizes that I'm trying to build this whole CIO thing because, again, very new, a new transition. I have to get my footing. And so he's taken on a lot of responsibility for the home stuff. And it's given me a chance to actually physically go into work, actually focus on the job of figuring out what a CIO is and being a good one. And I suspect that after a time, things will even out a little bit and we'll switch off again so that he can go do he's an engineer, so he can go off and do his engineering thing. I can probably slow down a little bit and take over some of the home stuff. Our entire lives together, Christina, has been that, just the switching off and actually having the conversation about it that says, okay, here's what we're trying to do now, right? So it's not something left unsaid. We have the conversation. Here's what we're trying to do now. Here's where I'm trying to get to. Here's what we need. And he just gets in, and he does it. And then we decide when we switch off again. It's the support.
Right. That's fantastic. And I think that flexibility is how it has to be. I think as we've transitioned away from these expectations, and I think the pandemic has made a lot of families transition really a lot faster of the expectations of what they're going to be for their children, what they're going to be for their partner, what they're going to be at work. And for better or for worse, those roles have been melding together a lot more and meshing.
Yep.
So I was really excited to see NASA rename its headquarters after Mary Jackson. I was very excited. But what are your thoughts about getting more diversity? I know, a few years ago, I was trying to put together a pipeline program for a technology department and going to the universities and looking at their just drastic lack of diversity in any information technology engineering, any of those. It was predominantly white, predominantly male. What are your thoughts on really infusing a lot more diversity in these fields? I know there's a lot of work being done, whether it's Girls Who Code, Black Girls Code, Latinx Girls Code, but what else can we do to kind of kickstart those things?
So I don't know what I was listening, and you made a comment that I very much agreed with, where you said we all have to figure out how we help from where we are, right? Not everybody can do what everybody else is doing. And in our world, I am focused on CyberQuest and CodeQuest. And CyberQuest and CodeQuest are programs for high school students to bring them in, and it's a coding competition, and you work and you do preparation. And there are two things there, and those two things related to CyberQuest and CodeQuest will apply to all of those programs that you talk about. One, it's STEM/STEAM and getting that embedded. And it's finding, when we do CyberQuest and CodeQuest, there are some schools that have the resources that just participate automatically, right? Because they have the resources to go do that. But then we have to make an effort to go reach out to the schools that don't think they qualify, nor do they think they have the resources to go pull in those little black and brown kids that go to those schools to show them that they can participate. And it's hard for them because, you know, the rules are hard, getting caught up are hard, they don't necessarily have the same resources. So it's important to have diversity and pull them in. It is also very important that when those kids show up, they see people that look like them, right? Yes. Because if they show up and everybody else doesn't look like them, they go, oh, we don't belong there. If they even have one that they can see and connect to, one that says, oh, okay, right? Once you make that connection, again, back to the big world, your world gets so much bigger and you realize that there's something else that you can be. So for me, it is really, really important to encourage and recommend for the folks on my team that they participate in these kind of events. So one thing is the diversity and expanding it to those schools, and two is having representation for the folks facilitating so that these young kids can see themselves. I think if we do that for all of those different programs, I think we'll be able to advance more, and starting at the high school can't hurt, right? Because those are the folks that feed into the colleges and increase representation in those programs.
No, I'm absolutely a proponent in starting everywhere in K through 12, because somewhere along the way, little girls, for example, are actually better than little boys in, you know, math and science in elementary school. And then somewhere along the way, you know, that gets lost, that gets socialized out. And we have to, you know, make that shift. And K through.
Well, look at my story too. Well, look at my story in high school, right? Where somebody says, hey, you should be an engineer. And okay, right? That's inroads. That's not participation. And it got me. And my goal is to figure out how many of those little girls, right, out there that I can have that same kind of life-changing impact.
All right. Well, thank you so much. We've had Dorcia Jolliff today, CIO of Space Force. I'm kidding.
Martin Space.
Lockheed Martin Space. Thank you so much for your time today. This conversation's been amazing.
Absolutely. Absolutely my pleasure.